My stepdad spent my entire life pretending to be my real father, and now it's getting disturbing. My biological father left when I was an infant. I won't sugarcoat it, it was a hostile abandonment. My mom was left vulnerable, scared, and alone. That's when my stepdad entered the picture. I used to think he was a savior, but after my mom passed, he slipped up and told me the truth during a casual conversation about the past. He didn't win her over with flowers and romance. He pressured her. He saw a woman at her lowest point and used every ounce of leverage he had to force her into a marriage when I was about 2 years old. The marriage was abusive and exploitative from day one. My mom was the backbone. She worked multiple jobs to provide for his children from a previous relationship, my step-siblings. As I grew up, that cycle continued. I became the workhorse. Once I hit adulthood, the family duty fell on my shoulders. I was working 50-hour weeks to provide for my half-siblings, the children he and my mom had together, because they simply refused to work. My stepdad fostered this environment where I was the provider, yet I had zero agency. The weirdest part of my childhood wasn't just the work, it was the physical gaslighting. I am biracial, but I am white presenting. My mom was black. My stepdad is black. All my siblings are dark-skinned. Biologically, there is zero chance I am his. But from the moment they married, he decided that biology didn't fit his narrative. When I was in primary school, I must have been 6 or 7, I remember the first day of the new term. The teacher called out a name, my first name, stepdad's last name. I didn't move. I didn't think she was talking to me. My mom had always told me my name was her maiden name. When I got home, I asked her why the teacher called me that. My mom's face went pale. It turned out he had unlawfully registered me under his last name at the school office without her permission. He didn't adopt me. He just decided to overwrite me. I remember the argument that night, the sound of his voice booming through the vents, telling my mom that I was his son and he wouldn't have people asking questions. I ended up going to the office myself a week later and telling them they had my name wrong. The fallout at home was cold, silent, and terrifying. He treated it like I had personally spat on his legacy. Throughout my life, he had a strict rule, never use the word step. If I called my siblings step-siblings, it was treated like a slur. He demanded a unified family, but it was a unity built on a lie. Because I looked so different from the rest of the family, people naturally asked questions. My stepdad coached me on what to say. Tell them you take after my side, he'd say. He'd point to his father or a distant cousin who was slightly lighter-skinned and claim that's where I got my features. You have your grandfather's curly hair, he would tell me, staring intently at my head as if he could manifest the DNA through sheer willpower. It was a script. I was a puppet. If I ever mentioned my paternal side or the fact that I looked like my biological father, he would throw a tantrum, and I use that word intentionally for a grown man. He would get teary-eyed, his voice would tremble, and he'd play the martyr. After all I've done for you? After I gave you my name? Even though I rejected it. When my mom passed away, the thin veil of sanity in that house vanished. She was the one who held the truth. She was the one who, despite the pressure, refused to ever sign papers recognizing him as my father. He tried for 18 years to get her to sign me over to him legally. She held strong. But now that she's gone, he's become obsessed. It's like he's in a competition with a man he's never met. 13 years ago, I did the unthinkable. I reconnected with my biological father. He apologized for everything. We started talking daily. It's been 13 years of a solid, quiet relationship. My stepdad knows this, and it has turned him into a monster of insecurity. Whenever we are in public, he performs. If a neighbor stops to chat, he immediately interjects, "This is my son. He looks just like my side of the family, doesn't he?" The neighbors usually just blink, look at my pale skin and then at his dark skin, and offer a polite, confused nod. It's humiliating. I'm a grown man, and he's treating me like a biological trophy he won in a war. A few weeks ago, the tension finally snapped. I was in the kitchen with my sister, his biological daughter. We were scrolling through some old Facebook photos of our extended family. I pointed at a photo of my biopaternal cousins and said, "It's crazy how much I have the same nose as these guys." It was a casual observation. I wasn't trying to start a fight. But my stepdad was lurking in the hallway. He stormed in, his face contorted. "Our family has those features too," he shouted. "Why are you always looking for yourself in strangers? You're his last name. You have my father's eyes. You have our hair." He started to get those performative tears in his eyes. He sat down at the kitchen table and started a monologue about how he saved me and my mom, how he provided for us when we had nothing. He completely glossed over the fact that my mom worked herself into an early grave to pay for his children's lives. He glossed over the fact that I spent my 20s paying bills for his able-bodied kids who refused to get jobs. "I am your father," he whispered, looking at me with this intense, creepy desperation. "Those people? They're nothing. I am the one who made you." I started looking around at his side of the family, and I realized this is a pattern. I have an aunt, his sister, who did the exact same thing. She adopted a child and lied to him his entire life. She told him he was her biological son. When the boy finally grew up and found his biological mother, the aunt didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She gave him an ultimatum: if you speak to her, you are dead to me. It's a family culture of ownership. They don't want children, they want subjects. They want to erase your history so that they can be the sole authors of your life. Here's where the guilt trips in. People tell me, he raised you. He stayed. He didn't have to. And on paper, that sounds noble. If you didn't know the abuse, the exploitation, and the constant psychological warfare, you'd think I'm being an ungrateful brat. He throws these tantrums where he cries and says his heart is breaking because I'm rejecting him for a deadbeat. He makes me feel like every time I acknowledge my actual DNA, I am stabbing him in the chest. My siblings stay silent because they don't want to lose the financial support I provide, or they've been brainwashed by the no stepfamily rule for so long they think I'm the one being divisive. But I feel repulsed. Every time he touches my shoulder and says, "That's my boy," I feel my skin crawl. It doesn't feel like love. It feels like he's trying to swallow me whole. It feels like he's trying to finish what he started 30 years ago when he unlawfully changed my name at school, the total erasure of who I actually am. I haven't told my bio dad about the extent of this. I'm too embarrassed. How do I tell a man I've known for 13 years that the man who raised me is essentially cosplaying as my biological creator? So, am I the a-hole? Am I wrong for wanting to scream every time he claims my features as his own? Am I wrong for feeling that his fatherly love is actually just a desperate need for control and a refusal to face the reality of his own abusive past? Update. Reading through the responses felt like someone quietly turning on a light in a room I'd been stumbling around in for years. A lot of people pointed out things I had normalized so completely that I stopped recognizing them as abnormal. Nothing immediately exploded after I posted, but something shifted internally. Once you start naming a pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee it. Every interaction afterward felt sharper, like the volume on everything had been turned up. For a few days, I avoided being home as much as possible. I stayed late at work, ran errands that didn't need running, sat in parking lots scrolling through my phone just to delay going back. The house has always had a heavy atmosphere, but lately it feels performative, like I'm constantly being watched for signs of disloyalty. Even normal conversations feel staged, as if he's waiting for an opportunity to reinforce his version of reality. The first real incident after my post happened at a small family gathering. Nothing formal, just relatives stopping by and food being cooked. I almost didn't go downstairs, but avoiding things forever isn't realistic when you live in the same space. One of his cousins was visiting, someone I hadn't seen in years. We were introduced again out of politeness, and before I could even say my name, my stepdad placed his hand on my back and announced, loudly, "My son. He looks just like my father when he was young." It wasn't new behavior, but this time I noticed the details. The way he watched people's reactions closely. The pause afterward, like he was waiting for confirmation. The cousin hesitated for half a second too long before nodding along, clearly confused but unwilling to challenge him. That pause hung in the air longer than the words themselves. I felt that familiar mix of embarrassment and anger creeping up my neck. Normally I would have smiled politely and disengaged. Instead, I just said my name and walked away. No correction, no argument, just refusal to participate. He followed me into the kitchen a few minutes later. The tone wasn't explosive at first. It was quiet, almost wounded. He asked why I always made things awkward when family came over. I told him I didn't do anything. That answer irritated him more than outright confrontation would have. He started talking about respect, about loyalty, about how families present a united front. Then he pivoted, as he always does, into sacrifice. Everything he had supposedly done for me was listed again like items on an invoice. Food, housing, school supplies, rides to activities decades ago. The implication sat underneath every word: those things created ownership. I didn't argue. I just listened, and that seemed to frustrate him even more. Eventually he asked directly why I never correct people when they call him my father. That question landed differently than it used to. I realized he wasn't asking for honesty, he was asking for participation in the narrative. Silence wasn't enough anymore. He wanted affirmation. I told him calmly that I don't correct people because I don't want scenes, but that doesn't change reality. The shift in his face was immediate. Not anger first, panic. Real panic. His voice got shaky and he started talking faster, jumping between topics. He said I was letting outsiders poison me against family. He said blood doesn't matter compared to who stayed. Then he said something that stuck with me long after the conversation ended. He said, "You wouldn't even exist the way you do if it wasn't for me." That sentence bothered me more than anything else he's ever said. It wasn't metaphorical. He meant it literally, like my identity was something he constructed. The conversation ended when other relatives walked in, and he instantly switched back to smiling host mode. Watching that emotional flip happen so quickly was unsettling. It made everything feel rehearsed. After that night, I started noticing how often he inserts himself into conversations about my appearance or personality. If someone compliments my work ethic, he claims I got it from him. If someone comments on my hair or facial features, he redirects it back to his side of the family. It happens so automatically that I don't think he even hears himself anymore. A few days later, something else happened that pushed things further. I was on the phone with my biological father in the backyard. We talk regularly, but usually I keep those calls private to avoid conflict. That day I didn't realize my stepdad had come outside. When I turned around, he was standing near the door, completely still, listening. I ended the call quickly, but the damage was done. He asked who I was talking to even though he already knew. When I confirmed it, he laughed, but it wasn't amused laughter. It sounded hollow. He asked what we talk about every day. The question felt invasive, like he was asking for a report. I told him we just talk about life. That answer didn't satisfy him. He wanted details, what advice he gives, whether I call him dad, whether I tell him personal things. The conversation escalated when he said it was disrespectful to prioritize someone who abandoned me over someone who stayed. That argument has always been his strongest weapon because it sounds reasonable on the surface. For the first time, I pushed back. I told him reconnecting with my biological father doesn't erase anyone else's role in my life. I said relationships aren't competitions. I also said, carefully, that my relationship with my bio dad is my decision and not something that requires approval. He went quiet after that, which is usually worse than yelling. Silence with him means resentment building. Later that evening, my half-siblings acted noticeably colder toward me. Short answers, avoidance, subtle tension. It became obvious that he had spoken to them privately. That's another pattern. Conflict rarely stays between two people. It spreads quietly through the household until you feel outnumbered without knowing exactly what was said. One of my sisters eventually told me he felt heartbroken and believed I was replacing him. Hearing that framed as emotional betrayal made me feel guilty even though logically I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. That guilt is the hardest part to untangle. Growing up, emotional responsibility was placed on me early. If he was upset, it became my job to fix it. If he cried, I was expected to comfort him. Even now, a part of my brain automatically scans for ways to restore peace, even when I'm the one being pushed. Around this time, I finally told my biological father a small portion of what had been happening. Not everything, just enough to explain why I sometimes seem tense when we talk. I expected awkwardness or maybe defensiveness. Instead, he got very quiet and said he never wanted to create conflict in my life. He didn't criticize my stepdad. He didn't tell me to choose sides. He just said that I'm allowed to know where I come from and that identity isn't something anyone else gets to rewrite. The contrast between that response and what I'm used to at home hit me harder than I expected. Another incident happened shortly after that conversation. We were watching television together, something we rarely do anymore. A commercial came on featuring a father and son who clearly looked alike. My stepdad laughed and nudged me, saying, "See? Just like us." I didn't laugh back. I didn't react at all. The room became uncomfortably quiet. After a minute he asked if I was ashamed of him. That question felt unfair and strangely revealing at the same time. It wasn't about resemblance anymore. It was about validation. I told him I wasn't ashamed, but I also wasn't comfortable pretending something that isn't true. He stood up abruptly and left the room. Later I heard him crying in his bedroom. That sound used to destroy me emotionally. This time, I felt conflicted. Sad, yes, but also aware that his pain doesn't automatically mean I've done something wrong. Since then, the tension has become more subtle but constant. He doesn't openly confront me as often, but he doubles down in public situations. Introductions are louder. Statements about resemblance are more exaggerated. It feels less like affection and more like reinforcement, as if repetition might eventually make it real. I've also started reflecting more on my mom's role in all of this. When she was alive, she quietly protected certain boundaries even while enduring everything else. She never signed papers recognizing him as my father. She corrected official records when she could. At the time I didn't fully understand how intentional that resistance was. Now it feels like she was preserving something for me that she knew might matter later. Realizing that has changed how I view my discomfort. It doesn't feel like betrayal anymore. It feels like honoring a truth she fought to keep intact. The biggest change, though, is internal. The physical reaction I described before, the skin-crawling feeling when he claims me, hasn't gone away, but I don't immediately shame myself for it now. I've started recognizing it as a boundary response rather than cruelty. I'm still living in the same environment, still navigating the same dynamics, and nothing is neatly resolved. There hasn't been a dramatic confrontation or clean ending. Mostly it's small moments accumulating, each one clarifying the pattern a little more. I don't hate him. That's the part people sometimes misunderstand. I understand that he may genuinely believe his version of fatherhood. I understand that insecurity and fear probably drive a lot of his behavior. But understanding motive doesn't erase impact. What I'm wrestling with now is the realization that gratitude and discomfort can exist at the same time. Someone can have been present in your life and still cross boundaries. Someone can provide materially while also trying to control your identity. I'm starting to accept that feeling off wasn't an overreaction. It was my instincts catching up to something my mind had been trained to ignore. There's still more unfolding, and I don't know where things will land long term. For now, I'm learning what it feels like to exist without automatically shrinking myself to keep someone else emotionally stable. That alone feels unfamiliar enough to be unsettling, but also strangely relieving.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update for more such stories.